Lesson 3. Lesson 3. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Caliphate and Khilafat. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Khilafat, Islamic Caliphate, by ex-brigadier Mustansir Billah. Our precise subject today is which will exist, the Western or Islamic civilization. Our precise subject today is which will exist, the Western or Islamic civilization. Samuel P. Huntington was the first to discover the struggle for existence, survival between various civilizations of the world. It was the Titan, man of great intelligence, Sir Arnold J. Toynbee, who was the fount of the phenomena of clash of the civilizations, who was the fount of the phenomena of clash of the civilizations, operative since millions of years, operative since millions of years. A summary of his book. Shall try to cover the summary of his book in 2 to 3 lessons, inshallah. Allah be willing. A study of history. A study of history. British historian Arnold J. Toynbee is accepted the world over as the greatest historian of all times, whose book, A Study of History, has far outclassed Gibbon's Decline and Fall of Roman Empire and Spengler's The Decline of the West, published 1919, published AD 1919. Toynbee took about 30 years in his research. Toynbee took about 30 years in his research and wrote The History of Man in 10 volumes. These 10 volumes were abridged by an American, D.C. Somerville, in 2 volumes to about 1/6 of its original size, and contrived to retain its words and methods, Toynbee began writing in 1920, finished in 1953-55. Began writing in 1920, finished in 1953-55. The abridged volumes were published the second time by University Press, New York and London in 1965 in 2 volumes. It is a tough reading, and unless one has studied the world geography, history, economics, political science, and English literature, one is really unable to follow. Toynbee begins with his own story of research and quest for an intelligible unit of history. Toynbee begins with his own story of research and quest for an intelligible unit of history, by which is meant a unit of mankind whose history he could trace from the beginning to the end. Unit of mankind whose history he could trace from the beginning to the end, encompassing, embodying all human aspects: political, social, geographic, economic, cultural, racial, linguist, linguistic, and religious. Linguistic and religious. The history of kings was the story of kings and not of the people. Dividing the mankind on geographic basis was again not intelligible, for kingdoms, religions, and cultures overlapped many geographical features. Division and study of man on linguistic basis was again impossible, for the languages changed after almost every 100 miles. Studying the history of nations was again marked with serious difficulties. Studying the history of nations was again marked with serious difficulties and inconsistencies, my apologies, and inconsistencies, especially because their areas have been expanding and contracting. For example, Britain, which is now only an island, was sometimes spread over Europe, and for a century over the entire world, which included numerous people, religions, and languages. So it has never been a standard intelligible unit. According to him, if Great Britain as a nation state could not be an intelligible unit of history, no other country could pass the test. According to him, if Great Britain as a nation state could not be an intelligible unit of history, no other country could pass the test. He then analyzed Britain's history in reverse order. He then analyzed Britain's history in reverse order and found these principal chapters. A. The establishment in reverse order. The establishment of the industrial system of economy since the last quarter of 18th century. B. The establishment of responsible parliament government since the last quarter of the 17th century. C. The expansion overseas beginning in the third quarter of the 16th century with piracy and developing gradually into a worldwide foreign trade and the acquisition of colonial territories, political expansion. D. Going into the reverse order, the Reformation since the second quarter of the 16th century. The Reformation since the second quarter of the 16th century. E. The Renaissance since the last quarter of the 15th century. F. The establishment of the feudal system. The establishment of the feudal system since the 11th century. G. The conversion of the English from the religion of the so-called heroic age to Western Christianity since the last year of the 6th century. Conversion from the religion of the so-called heroic age of Western Christianity since the last year of the 16th century. He saw in this history that the forces in action which operate on each of the parts are not national but proceed from wider causes and are not intelligible in their partial operation until a comprehensive view is taken of their operation throughout the society. Great Britain, he found, was a part of a great whole, a society or a civilization which formed an intelligible unit of history. Great Britain, he found, was a part of a great whole, a society or a civilization which formed an intelligible unit of history. He also discovered the origination of the society in Western Europe around 700 AD. Origination of the society around Western Europe around 700 AD. And also that the Western Christendom was affiliated to an earlier society or was the offspring of that society, the Hellenic society, was the offspring of the society, the Hellenic society of Greco Roman civilization, which had originated in the coasts and islands of the Aegean before 1100 BC. Before 1100 BC. He also found that side by side with the Western Christendom society were other civilizations, all different from each other almost entirely, all different from each other almost entirely. That is, different in totality in the cultural planes. Thus, he writes that unmistakably we can distinguish in the world today, that is around 1930, 1940, at least four other major living societies, at least four other major living societies. So at present, that is around 1930, 1940, these major living civilizations, societies, exist on the earth. Now he names them, I'll name them. One, Western Christendom Society in Europe and America. Western Christendom Society in Europe and Americas. Two, an Orthodox Christian Society in South and Eastern Europe and Russia. It now forms part of the Western Christendom Society, and both together are generally called the Western civilization, and both together are generally called the Western civilization. Third, an Islamic society with its focus in the arid zone, which stretches diagonally across North Africa and Middle East from the Atlantic to the outer face of the Great Wall of China. An Islamic society, third, with its focus on the arid zone, which stretches diagonally across North Africa and Middle East from the Atlantic to the outer face of the Great Wall of China. It has two offshoots, the Arabic and the Persian. It has two offshoots, the Arabic and the Persian. 4. A Hindu society in the tropical and subcontinent of India. 5. A Far Eastern society in the subtropical temperate region between the arid zone, the Pacific, the areas of Korea, China, Japan, Vietnam, Cambodia, etc. Then he found that if we turn back to the cross section of 775 AD, if we turn back to the cross section of 775 AD, the number and identity of the societies on the world map is nearly the same as at the present time, is nearly the same as at the present time. The next question. The next question, how do we define a society? He says, how do we define a society? Society is the common ground between the respective fields of activities of a number of individual human beings. As per him, the individual energies of the society constitute the vital forces. The individual energies of the society constitute the vital forces whose operation determines the history of the society, including its time span, that is, its life, determines the history of their society, including its time span, that is, its life. The intelligible unit of history is neither a nation state nor at the other end of the scale, mankind. The intelligible unit of history is neither a nation state nor at the other end of the scale, mankind, but a certain grouping of humanity which we have called a society. As stated, while exploring the circumstances of the birth of the Western society or civilization, we stumbled on the deathbed of another notable society to which the Western society stands in relationship like an offspring, stands in relationship like an offspring to which, in a single word, the Western Christendom is affiliated, to which, in a single word, the Western Christendom society is affiliated. Similarly, when the history of other four civilizations was traced, it was found that each was affiliated to a various previous society which had become extinct and dead, and which could be called a sort of a parent society. I repeat, similarly, when the history of other four existing civilizations was traced, it was found that each was affiliated to a previous society which had become extinct and dead, and which could be called a sort of a parent society. He writes, however, in Islamic civilization, it was found that it was neither parented nor affiliated to another civilized previous society. He writes, however, in Islamic civilization, it was found that it was neither parented nor affiliated to another previous society. He found that though Islam bifurcated into the sects of the Sunnis and the Shias, as Christian Church split into the Catholics and Orthodox churches, but this division, he says, was not so hard and historically consequential as between Catholic and Orthodox churches, but this division was not so hard and historically consequential as between Catholic and Orthodox churches. That's the end for today. Shall meet tomorrow. In the next session, Allah be willing, we shall see how the identification and rise of societies. We shall see the identification and rise of society. Till then, please pray for me. Sorry, on the 28th, my apologies, on the 28th, 12th December, we shall meet again, inshallah. Till then, please pray for me, ex-brigadier.